course, you know, I can remember endless seminars and workshops, and I'm sure Drucilla can as well, where he would repeat something you had heard 1,100 times. Yes, please do not once again tell me about a decision necessarily having to be made against the background of undecidability, and that the only decision that deserves its name is that. I heard that so many times that in the end it became like a dog sign. You know, I said, no, not like that again. And like everybody else, you know, what is this? Well, it doesn't matter. Do only I hear that?
That's my cell phone.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right.
That's fine. So you would
basically... It's Derrida speaking to us from the next.
So you would basically, I mean, I'm sure I'm not the only one who experienced that, yes? And that's how it is, you know. What do you want? I mean, you know, there's a limit there's a repertoire one has, and one falls back on that. And then you would always hope that you could get him to a point where he would leave that behind and really start improvising, yes? Not bring out the old things one more time about only the unforgivable that can be forgiven, only the undecidable, that became a kind of logic almost that he would, you know, go back. And you would want him to start improvising, and that's where things would become really interesting. And that's where you want to get him, as it were, get to the point where he was no longer really so aware of the context, perhaps. He had not negotiated or calculated so much in advance, but he really started.
But it's always an apologia. But it's always an apologia when he says, "Look, I'm going to have to improvise now." Okay, he's like, there's a limit on what's going to be said.
An example, I think I mean, I'm with you, and I sometimes got impatient with Derrida. And Derrida and I ran a series of seminars with a wonderful philosopher, Rainer Schormann, and we lost 2 aides in the 4th year of our seminar, and our 5th seminar, which Rainer died before I could participate in it, leaving Derrida and myself and Teresa Brennan as chair, who has also died, was on this question, is feminist philosophy, and is sexual difference a philosophical question? And in the course of it, I turned to Derrida and said, "Are you a feminist?" And he said, "I have a favor to ask you. Will you not ask me that question?" And I said, "I'm sorry, but I have to violate you here and refuse the favor. Are you a feminist?" He said, "Okay, for the purposes of this conference and out of respect for what Drucilla means by feminism, I will say, I am a feminist." And everybody was in total shock. I said, "That's enough, we can end the conference now. Thank you." Now later when he was challenged, you said, "I am a feminist." He said, "I said I am a feminist in the context of being asked by Drucilla Cornell in a conference where Rainer had died, and where I had conceded that feminist philosophy is philosophy, and the question of sexual difference is a philosophical question, one of the few philosophers to ever acknowledge that." So I think that there were times in certain contexts where Derrida would feel called to take a position, and in negotiations, he begins to see more and more and more in this politically fraught world of ours, how even if you can't know in advance what an enunciation like "I'm a feminist" is going to mean, or "I am a socialist," or "I am a communist," or that "I'm against the war in Iraq," that these kinds of negotiations and institutions had to be undertaken. And negotiations is really a very, very long elaboration on how we have to take positions, we have to judge, and we have to build institutions. And if we don't do it, we're not even beginning to live up to infinite responsibility.
Yes. We've been talking about haunting and of the dead and things like that, and I would like to ask about a different kind of haunting, haunting of literature. So it seems to me that all the 3 of your papers, to some extent, Shakespeare was in there, although perhaps I'm a bit over, you know, I hear voices that aren't even there. But so you were mentioning Spectres of Marx and the Hamlet scene with the ghosts, and in your paraphrase of the last 2 sentences, it it reminded me very much of what Derrida says in Aphorism Countertime, which obviously is about Romeo and Juliet, but also about lots of the things that seem to be at stake in that last sentence. And then you said something like, oh, but here's the rub. And I obviously hear Hamlet. But, you know, this might be, but obviously in English you never quite know, is it Shakespearean or is it English or, you know, what is what. But,
just pretentious.
yeah, yeah, but so, and I feel a bit bad about asking this question because it seems to be sidetracking us a bit from the haunting that we've been talking about earlier. But then again, it seems to be quite important to Derrida because when he writes about Inspectors of Mars, obviously the whole Hamlet thing is so central. So I was kind of wondering what the relationship is between the haunting of literature and of Shakespeare, the Inspectors of Mars, with the haunting of the dead and the call of the dead and what we're talking about earlier.
Why do you look at me?
Well, I think that you're right, that's a theme that's running throughout, and it's interesting that, and I think you did too in a way, I pick up on Derrida's insistence that the dead and haunting is performative and a call, and it must be addressed, and this perhaps is the only thin line we can walk in terms of misreading or perhaps reading correctly that the ghost, the patriarchal ghost in particular, demands revenge. The father, you know, you screw around with somebody else and daddy wants you to make sure that both mommy and the unfaithful partner have gone. Which is why I think he, interestingly enough, chose for the purposes of that ghost, the question of infidelity, sexual infidelity, another question that obsessed Derrida, and the demands of patriarchy, that is that, you know, it's a woman's needs, and she must die, and so must the lover. So it's a very interesting, specific ghost. In these same seminars I mentioned, I asked Derrida why, for instance, he had not used the ghost, say, of Seph's dead children in Beloved, which would seem to have appealed to the mass dead that he kept returning to in the seminar, the dead, you know, who suffered, were enslaved, fought against slavery, or never succeeded in having enough freedom to fight against slavery. Wouldn't Seph's dead children, Beloved herself, be a better ghost for the demand and the address? And his response was, my ghost, the ghost of the Inspectors of Mars, is a ghost that has to face the endless specter of patriarchy, getting back, of course, to am I a feminist, and that undoing the patriarchal demand of revenge because of the infidelity of woman may be what is at stake in undoing the demand of the dead for revenge, which I thought was a fascinating answer, and showed certainly Derrida's endless commitment to taking very seriously the question of sexual difference and patriarchy as a philosophical question.
I want to respond to that briefly. One of the questions I have as you're speaking about this is whether the dead have this right to make this claim on us. In the case of Beloved, Beloved is driving somebody crazy, right? You have something, a bit of this in the politics of Israel as well, that the dead of the Holocaust are creating a kind of madness, you might say, within the social and its response, and there's been a lot of commentary on that. It's a very controversial issue.